All right, this is me again. Just to let you know, I'm about to start the webinar, and then we will wait for like 3 or 4 more minutes until everyone's here. So yeah, have a great event, and thanks for being here today.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, welcome to this LSE Festival online session, How to Understand Digitalisation and Change Management, a socio-technical approach, part of our Skills for a Fast Changing World series hosted by LSE Online. In this series, we invite LSE experts to discuss research trends in their field about professional skills we need for success. My name is Jeff, and I am a program manager in the LSE Online team. LSE Online makes LSE world-leading teaching and research accessible to a global audience. We provide a comprehensive portfolio of online programs to equip you and your organisation with the knowledge and skills to advance in an ever-changing world. Today's event forms part of the LSE Festival People and Change, which is taking place all week and until Saturday, the 17th of June. Exploring how change affects people and how people affects change. The event is being recorded and will hopefully be made available as a video or podcast subject to no technical difficulties. Whilst we wait for everyone to arrive, we would love to hear where in the world you're joining us from today. You can let us know in the chat section. Today, we are welcoming Dr. Emilio Lastra-Gil for our second LSE Festival online skill session. Dr. Emilio Lastra-Gil is currently teaching strategy and information systems at the LSE. He has also taught corporate and organisational strategy and business strategy in international and emerging markets. His main interests concern the relationship of ICT to organisational change and the role of ICT in socio-economic development. With 20 years practitioner experience, principally in the ICT industry, with special expertise in economic and financial modelling, commercial infrastructure projects. He is currently working on a multi-billion UK energy infrastructure project. If you have any questions during the event you'd like to ask Emilio, please post your questions in the Q&A box. We will get to as many as we can towards the end of the event. I'm now going to hand over to Emilio.
Thank you very much, Jeff. It's a pleasure to join you today in this presentation. So I will walk you through my slides, which I will share in a minute. And it's a very interesting subject. And honestly, I think hopefully you will have that. You will enjoy the presentation. It's based on a comparative cases studies, one in China and the other one in Mexico, in particular in how people have been benefited by the use of the technology of ICT. I hope I can convey all the ideas to you. Hopefully this will trigger more research in this area. And that's one of my main objective in this presentation, to share with you these views, but also for me to proceed in this particular area of research. But thank you. We call, as Jeff said, how to understand digitalization and change management as such a technical approach. And I will start this presentation today just talking about the 5 properties of what is digital goods. There are 5 main characteristics. The first one is non-rival. When it's used by one agent, does not degrade its usefulness to any other agent. The other one is expansible, which means when its quantity can be made arbitrarily large or arbitrarily quick at no cost at all. Then we have is discrete or indivisible. So digital goods are also spatial. Spatial means that they are both nowhere and everywhere at the same time. Just as any copy is the original for a digital good, so the communication of a digital good is its transportation and distribution. And the last characteristic is digital goods are recombinant. By this, I mean they are cumulative and emergent. That is the key characteristics that we have for in terms of what means for a digital product or a digital item. However, what is important is let's start talking about change management. ICTs, innovation concurs with and reinforces organizational change, either decided by management or improvised at the workplace. This means that, when you have an ICT or is implemented in the organization, it can trigger changes, but sometimes we don't know what these changes are going to be. And that is the beauty of the ICT. We also discussed about techno change, which is for technology-driven organizational change. We know or we learn very often about transformation or ICT transformation, but sometimes there is an intended outcome, or sometimes we don't know whether this is going to be the deliberate outcome of which is based on the strategy. So now I want to bring the concept of socio-materiality, and that is because when we see an application, when we see, let's say, WhatsApp or think any application that you're using, that has an impact in society. It's important to understand how this application, how that technology is going to change human beings. We're talking most recently, we're talking about artificial intelligence everywhere in the world, but in this particular field of research, we are talking that sometimes the theory of technology, we have to think in a socio-technical environment, socio-materiality. That means that it's not a deterministic. I mean, you don't know when you apply a technology or you use it, we don't have a recipe A, B equals C. It's impossible. Social and material are inextricably linked, and people in different organizations may use the same new technology in different manners. Alongside classical economic research, there are two main stream of theories that can be used to study this area, which is institutional economic and new economic sociology. What that means is the core of math research is based in two main theories. The one is transaction cost theory, or transaction cost economics, and on the other side, we have the social embeddedness. We are looking at a hybrid approach. On one side, we have transaction cost, which is the theory of reference based on markets, firm, and network. But on the other side, we have the complementarity, which is social embeddedness, which look at the relationship, social connectivity, reciprocity, and trust. Where in transaction cost, we are considering bonded rationality and opportunistic behavior. So important here to say, like any other research, when we study ICTs, in particular in developing countries and in other fields, it's important to look at context, because depending on the context, sometimes will be the outcome that we're going to get. I'm not just went to the Oxford Dictionary and say, okay, what is context? It's basically the circumstances that form the setting of an event, the statement or ideas in terms of which it can be fully understood. So that setting, that particular environment is what is going to drive basically the outcome of the change that we are expecting. In this particular research that I will be presenting today, which is based on ICT in developing countries, there are three main discourses that have been pretty much promoted. But when I say promoted, is the outcome of research. These three discourses have been delivered by Professor Krishanti Abgeru. She says that there are three ways of seeing this research. One is when we transfer ICT and organizational practices from advanced economies and adapting them into the context of particular developing economies. Sometimes is a second approach could be IS innovation as a process embedded in local conditions for developing countries, which can be, for example, the case of China that we will be studying or I will be presenting in a minute. And the other one is a transformative intervention and associates it with aspirations and policies for socioeconomic development. What is important is that ICT is delivering change. In rural areas, in developing countries, are pretty much witnessing an impressive diffusion of ICT, and its impact on agriculture is of great interest. In particular, because when we look at ICTs, we look at different areas, services, manufacturing, and so on. But agriculture has been somehow left behind. So, as I said earlier, lacks or the business in adoption of the virtual arm's length relationships. So, when we look at the context, we think ICT reduce search costs by enabling better and affordable communication. We know that. But also, we see in many industries, like say Amazon, applications connect buyers and sellers. In the context of agriculture, transactions through virtual bartering, trading, tendering platform is possible, but not in a great extent as we have it in Amazon, for example. It's also possible to look at the traceability of goods and services. That is important here to say that what we learn from this research is that differences in entrepreneurial abilities ignore social habits and contextual issues that influence sourcing decisions. For example, seek to connect farmers with the market rather than to each other. Is undoubtedly less time facilitate performance because firms can disperse their business among many competitors, but also give you the opportunity to search pricing and avoid that small number gaining situations that can interrupt that inefficient relationship, in particular in rural areas where there's a lot of isolation. When I say there's a lot of isolation, they are connected. But and here we are. So let me introduce the case of China. This is the emergence of Taobao. It's an e-commerce platform which has been successful. And one of the issues, and this paper was pretty much completed in 2016 and basically published in MIC Quarterly. One of the issues that China had it's not specific of China, for many developing countries, but in particular China for the large population, is that in rural and the underdevelopment is a top priority because has caused some social issues, migration from rural to urban areas. ICT e-commerce, which is in particular the technology that have been used for accelerate development in this area, can empower a marginalized community, giving rise to a rural e-commerce ecosystem that can aid the self-development. The advantage of e-commerce is that allows for visibility and involvement, but ICT can also allow sustainability of products. So here we are. There are two villages which were presented and where this study was conducted. One which is Wuchan and the other one quite Xinjiang. So these were areas where villages were quite relatively poor. In particular, Wuchan, 70% of the population were farmers, and they have not attended high school. On the other side, Xinjiang, 92% of the populations work in the agriculture sector. Therefore, both communities have a high proportion of people working in the agricultural sector. So the other characteristic they had is the income per capita was quite low, as you can see, less than $400. What is in terms of the products that they were offering in that platform for e-commerce? In the case of Wuchan, the villages can sell agricultural produce such as bamboo, sweet potatoes, and so on, mainly agricultural products. On the other hand, Xinjiang villages were able to sell products that were manufactured, such as outdoor equipment, backpacks, sleeping bags, and so on. And you see that the effect or the change is that ICT, in particular e-commerce, brought an increase in the revenues. You can see here in this slide. In the case of Wuchan, where people were mainly depending based on agriculture, there was increase in revenues up to, well, in that particular year was 2013, which this study was conducted of 17 million. And on the side, when, as you see, there were manufacturing products, the revenues in that for that year was 72.4 million. So that is change that brings more revenues, more but also somehow people in those areas are more willing to stay because there's a job for them to do in those areas. One important thing that is important to address is that this is not something that can be done easily. I mean, you can implement it quick. You cannot implement it very quickly. It takes time because you need to, at least in this case, there was a network, there was an ecosystem that was created. And you can see here a summary, which is presented in the paper, where there are 5 different categories of actors. We have the grassroots leaders, which are the villagers, who initiate, lead, and shape the development of an ecosystem, e-commerce ecosystem. But also these are those people who provide training. One of the key characteristics when you make change in or implement a new technology, people needs to be trained. And those were the grassroots leaders. But we also had, in the case of China, e-tailers, who are villagers, sell products through e-commerce. Then the e-supply partners, which are those villagers who produce, supply, or distribute products that are sold in e-commerce. The third-party service providers who provide support, let's say, taking photographies and helping, to build the websites and so on that is needed. But also the institutional support. And that is something very important in ICT for development. How is the institution supporting those individuals? These are those who play a functional role in improving the infrastructure, because it's not only just put the platform, it's not only internet, you need to build roads, you need to do everything to ensure that, that market is accessible to everyone and for everyone in the country. So this was a successful implementation of e-commerce. Rural communities were empowered by ICT can become the driver of change. Communities can basically be self-sufficient if we give them the support, the platform, and then help them to, based on the skills, to build, how those areas where they can be useful and they can contribute more or add value. Besides local leaders, there are a number of independent players involved in creating social change, and that means providing an inclusive view of a rural e-commerce ecosystem. And so that is what I say, that in ICT, e-commerce can have different affordances for different actors in the evolution of the rural e-commerce ecosystem. However, as usual, there's an intended effect. There was a reoccurrence of out-migration during rural e-commerce advancement. There were some villages where there was not sufficient area for warehousing products. There are some people say, well, there's a limited limit. E-commerce can help, but obviously people have aspirations. People can go beyond what is being created in that village, and then they go. That is possible. Also, it's important to see, you see something positive, people getting more revenues, but also the risk of environmental degradation to the rural landscape. And then, as like in any other relationship, the affected social relationships, intense competition in e-commerce, everyone wants to get more revenues and so on. So those community close relationship obviously were somehow affected by competition. So this is the case of China, which has been so hard somehow successful. Academics love it. But then when I started my research in 2013, I used the case of Mexico. And I thought, well, perhaps there's something happened, something similar can apply in the case of Mexico, which we know is a country, a large country next to the United States. And then I thought, well, because of the proximity to America, then it's in America, but the proximity to the United States can perhaps, somehow benefit the country. And then I started my research, which I completed in 2018. What I see that the case of Mexico, despite enabling impersonal market relationships, ICTs are still largely subservient to the historically powerful and traditional community principles of family, kinship, social connectivity, and trust. I think Mexico is a country where I see that those social ties quite strong. And here we are. Farmers are somehow unable to fully exploit ICTs and find new distribution channels because they are embedded in existing business relationships. It is a case where social relationships are very important. And once you find the way, or people, and they help you to do, particular transactions, you are pretty much attached to those relationships. And that, well, obviously, not always. There's some very disruptive approach. Where ICT helps and e-commerce helps to do, these transactions. In Mexico, at least during that period of my research, we didn't observe that a number of people using e-commerce. Basically, there's not a platform like a Taobao. There was completely, people were trying to use ICT in an innovative manner. And I will give you some examples now. I study, like in the case of China, there are 2 villages and so on. In Mexico, I went to 2 different counties, and after traveling the whole, different part of the country, I selected those 2 areas. One, which where there is there are banana producers, which is Tabasco, and not in the next state or next county is I found an organic rice producer. On the left, which is that you have on the screen, is basically that business or banana is a long, basically well-established business, which started in the 19th century. There's a continuity, and family traditions are very important in that area. Growers conduct transactions individually. They group through the banana associations to basically enabling better the use of technology, both formally and informally, to deal with export clients, track competitors, reduce hazards, mitigate opportunistic behaviors. That's the reason why they use the association of banana producers. So when I visit that town, which is called Teapa in Tabasco, I found immediately that network. Some people sell the boxes, some people have delivery training. It's a very well established, network ecosystem. Everyone knows what to do, who is doing what, when, and so on. And that is an area where basically Taobao was around will be fantastic because everyone is the ecosystem is there. On the other side, we had a not far away, perhaps when I say not far away, 200 kilometers from that town, I found this organic rice producer is basically it's a more radical and innovative business that has introduced novel cultivation techniques. In this particular case, it's an entrepreneur who is basically using the ICTs. The social network in this case is more relevant as the grower must build a network outside the region. Facebook and YouTube are more relevant in the pursuit of new customers, especially the middle classes. So here we are. In case of the banana producers, these are kind of pictures that we had. The term of technologies, they have smartphones, internet, they have internet, they have applications, Facebook, WhatsApp, and so on. However, important here to say, the mechanisms to reach new customers or distribution channels, they prefer the face-to-face. They go to international fairs. And more recently, well, when I said 2016, 17, they were using freshplaza.com, which but only the few. And you see here, and then when selling the bananas in the domestic market, which is over 120, pretty much 130 million people, they have a huge dependency of the wholesale market. And then if they go to the banana export, they have somehow used some applications. But when I say using in those in individualistic manner, not like Taobao, which is an e-commerce platform. And then you see that they tend to like trade fairs. They have a broker, and then they go through the distribution. And so here is two different approaches, but there's not that massive use of ICTs as I was expected. Important here to say that in this community, most of the farmers that I talked to, they have completed at least an undergraduate. They have a master's. They have very well, these are the middle, belongs to the middle class basically. And yet, I didn't see that massive, immersion of ICT. They use it for basically continuing the existing relationships that they have built in the past for many years. Instead, in the past, they used to have landlines, but now they're using mobile phones, they're using WhatsApp and so on, but not in a consistent manner as an end-to-end e-commerce. And then on this side, we have this large farm that produce organic rice. They have pretty much, this is an entrepreneur, the same pretty much applications that they use in the for the banana producers. But important here to say is that in this case, the owner of this farm basically is more active in using applications. They have also established a long-term relationship with a HIP Organic, which is a large organization in Germany, and so on. But what I found is that in this particular case, there's a positive contribution of ICT, which has a direct impact in the customer base, and also through because this producer has a deep access to websites, online courses, social media, but also in this case, there's not a group of farmers. It's one farmer basically so far away from the market, and he's trying to use as much as he can ICTs. So what I found sadly in Mexico, that agricultural business has lacked significantly in the updates and use of ICTs for strategic and operational purposes, at least mainly because of the greatest significance of personal relationship and face-to-face interactions. As I said here, social mores and traditions have contributed to the incomplete adoption of ICT by producers. So some of the conclusions that I have from this study is that my empirical evidence in Mexico shows that farmers' idiosyncratic, individualistic approach to conducting transactions is assisted by sporadic community support. The community help, the community replaced those institutions. Family, friends, basically provide support. I couldn't find the long-term cooperation that Powell that used, which I will discuss in a minute. Powell, based on transaction cost economics, discussed that it's important to have a long-term collaboration. Each farmer, in case of Mexico, is independent and follows an individualistic and opportunistic approach. What I found what I read based on the case of China, there was a more community approach, people supporting, helping each other, having a platform, and the platform basically was that family, that helped, to the individuals to sell the products. Occasionally, what I found in Mexico, farmers will work together to fulfill purchase orders, working as a team with community support, especially when they need to defend themselves from external risk. These are very good. Community works. There's an external issue, hurricane or whatever. The community come and together and they help each other. Once that particular incident or externality goes, then everyone will continue working on their way. There are some instances, however, when farmers use middlemen and then parties are on a hoc basis outside a long-standing arrangement, where they have basically follow habits that built in the past, and then they carry on in that way. I didn't find evidence of state policies effectively facilitating collaborative arrangement. What might be the case of China, where government perhaps in the case of Taobao helping community, which is a combined effort between government and a large organization. In the case of Mexico, everyone is sparse. Everyone has their own business, let's put it that way. Culture and social institutions, which is family, the cooperative associations, facilitate the intermittent cooperation. Economic actors rely on social connections and business relationships to work and tackle challenges together, learning from each other and collaborating to achieve competitive strength. So basically, what I miss in this case, or what we miss in the case of Mexico, the ecosystem that was formed by Taobao. As Powell in 1919 paper describes collaboration or cooperation and its effective long-run engagement that is sustained with appropriate regulation. In the context of agriculture in a developing country, regulation is ineffective because of feeble state policies, that is the case of Mexico, and weak institutions and social relationships instead determine the ease with which transactions and economic collaborative arrangements are formed. So what are the lessons learned? In one country, both working together, but there's a rule, there's a strategy, and the strategy is to ensure or to reduce, trying to reduce the number of people migrating to the cities, which somehow has been achieved, not completely. On the case of Mexico, which there's no direction at all, no strategy, it's just here is ICTs, use it in the way that you want to use them. And the changes is basically benefit or the potential or socioeconomic impact is driven by entrepreneurs for those people who are using in a wisely manner. So that's it from me. Any question?
Thank you very much, Emilio, for that. If you do have any questions, please use the Q&A section or comment section on LinkedIn. We've got a couple of questions already. So I'll begin. Anush asked, you mentioned organizations will use the same technology in different ways. So his question is, in context to enterprise technologies starting to integrate generative AI technology, where do you think the competitive advantage will come from when most organizations start to adopt the same technology? Is it in how they adapt to change and develop their change management strategy?
Well, that's a very good question. I mean, how this is going to, the strategy is going to deliver, you know, a change. That is something that basically will, is still, it's still too early to say, because obviously AI and some other areas still needs to be regulated. Okay. The regulation is coming. There's already a business case. Artificial intelligence has a business case, and we know that the business case is delivering revenues to large organizations. So basically, in the measure or in the way that large organizations basically are using artificial intelligence, those organizations will get benefits from those. What I see in the case of agriculture, that if AI is going to, which is needed in rural areas, then I will see that large organizations or large companies, which are basically existent at the moment, will take control of agriculture. So I will see a concentration of those companies driving the agricultural sector. I see that there will be obviously this is my personal views, a decline of smallholder communities because land will be concentrated in the few hands, which there's already that problem, but will be, in this case, will be large organization taking artificial intelligence in order to deliver, you know, what at the moment is, but you know, in the hands of smallholders, medium-sized farmers, and so on. That is the way that I see it in the case of developing countries in rural areas. Okay.
Great, thank you. Another question, and this is from Diego. He says, from your experience, how did the socio-material approach help you understand the context in a way that other approaches wouldn't do? Likewise, did you find any challenges when using it to interpret your fieldwork data?
Yes, I mean, thank you, Diego. Yes, I think we're looking at the social materiality. What it's telling you is that you cannot use only the artifacts. You cannot use a deterministic approach of the technology, saying, okay, if I use e-commerce, then you know they will drive high revenues and so on. No, because you need to have some other elements. You need to educate individuals who are going to use it, but most importantly, every society, every community is different because not everyone has the same capabilities. You need to have an inventory of what are the capabilities in that area. And then based on that, you know, either delivering training or those individuals decide what is the role that they will use in those, you know, in that ecosystem. Challenges that I have in my research, yes, because when I went, particularly in the case of Mexico, when I went there, I saw, we're talking 2013, 2018, there was a boom of smartphones and so on. And we saw that everyone was going to be in England or in some other countries, they have used their smartphones in one particular way. And then I found that in the case of Mexico, they still, using actually Facebook was picking up and so on. So, but people still using, despite having smartphones and all the technologies which we have in the UK, perhaps a bit of lag, but still is the same. What I found is that they were still happy to carry on face-to-face transactions. They want to keep those relationships that they have established for years. And that is the challenge. What we expect, one particular application brings, have to bring, or perhaps that was my challenge, thinking that was going to be a deterministic approach. It is not a deterministic approach. It's a socio-technical approach because that technology is immersed in that society. And I found that in the case of Mexico, is where there's strong family, strong communities, long ties. That is what is somehow not people trust you if they have been, if you have proof that you are able to deliver for a number of years. So then those particular things makes a bit difficult for ICT to deliver. I think is, and again, I saw that because Mexico was next to the US. I mean, this was my bias basically. It was going to be easy to implement it. It wasn't, or still, Tawau or any other platform still not being used in rural areas. Okay.
Great. Question from Andreas. How does the differences in trade policies between Mexico and China affect the local producers' strategic choices for using ICT?
Can you read again? The trade policies between Mexico and...
Yeah, how does the differences in trade policies between Mexico and China affect the local producers' strategic choices for using ICT?
Well, that's important. It's a very good question because I'm glad that we had this. We raised this question. I studied the policies that were basically used in Mexico, and I think in Mexico there was pretty much freedom in terms of there's regulations that not too strong. I mean, there are pretty much laissez-faire. Leave it. Do it if you want. Do it if you have money. There's not a regulatory approach in Mexico, whereas in China, as far as I understand, there's a state regulating pretty much the different sectors. Having done myself or study in depth the regulation system in China, that allow me to have a confidence that the confidence that basically the government or the state is supporting this development of e-commerce in the whole China. But in Mexico, there's no that policy, there's not that direction, there's not that strategy that push that say, okay, let's go into that direction. I didn't find that. In Mexico was more freedom. I mean, it's basically connections, long-term relationships, families, friends. If those people who have more land have more revenues, but also Mexico is divided. The north, close to America, there's a large companies driving, which is the case where I guess artificial intelligence will go very quickly. And then the country, as you approach the middle, which is Mexico City and the south, is more, you see more poverty. You see that there's not, land is more, slightly more fragmented. So, but in terms of regulation, in terms of trading policy, I think there's more, there's a lot of freedom there. And whether this is trading between those two countries, I can not tell you 100%, I mean, about the trading policy between those two countries, but individually, that's what I observe. Okay.
Great, thanks. Question from Francesca. She's asked, what are the change management practices applied to the economical changes described? She's asked if you could talk about a bit more about this.
Yeah, okay. Change, when I say change management, I'm talking about the changes, basically, or the transformation that can be delivered, basically, by using the technology. In this case, if we see in an organization, which Francesca, the organization theory applies to ICT in any case. When we look at the managing changes, basically, we expect that technology drive a change in the use, or the managers expect that, or at least there's a strategy, we expect that if we implement a system, things become more efficient, and then those changes are expected, perhaps reduce headcounts, and so on. That is what is expected when there's a transformation. Also, bear in mind that when you apply the managing change, you have to use, we use kind of the Levitt model, where we have the organization, we have procedures, we have people, and we have pretty much tasks. So all these, working together, you implement ICTs, and then there will be changes in the organization, or organizationally speaking, changes in processes and procedures, the way that tasks are conducted, and those is in a small company, let's put it that way. When we transfer those to a large, let's say, developing countries, what were you expecting? You are expecting basically farmers become more efficient. They will perhaps use less resources, less people, and technology will help to predict somehow what are the necessary, let's say, ingredients, or what the particular land is not using based on the expectations. So all these elements are changes that we expect to see when we transfer one to the other one. The same, because in reality, we're using the same theoretical approach. If we look at a farmer, you have the structure, you have the task will be more efficient, you have the individuals that will be using those technologies, which will be trained somehow, because it's needed to understand how we are going to use it. But it's how these people are using in the end the technology. That is what is the change, basically, because we don't expect that, for example, WhatsApp will be used for trading. We expect for texting messages, but no, WhatsApp is used to in some areas to develop the business, basically. Or Facebook, which was intended to have, connecting people, connecting communities, is used to sell produce as well. So people trying to find the ways to use the technology, and then based on their own, in an innovative manner. That's what I can say. Okay, thank you.
Great. One last question. This is from Gollum. They've asked, what is the relevance between making jobs and e-commerce? How can we increase the jobs in this way?
Making jobs and e-commerce. Okay, it's a good question. If you remember, when I did a show, the ecosystem, or the different how the actors were playing different roles, and then that is basically you can shift from one role to the other one. You can be working, or you basically, if you want to sell your produce, then you can basically do that. Then if you want to, let's say, change to another, there's a disintermediation of the technology and reintermediation. When one role disappears, there will be another role that will be created. Perhaps you will be driving analytics. If you want to go, in the case of China, if you say, well, this is not for me to be a producer, but I am interested to be analytical, I'm interested in the analysis of the data and how this can be done better, then you can become an analyst, or you can help to develop, the web pages, or do different things. It's not, the advantage of this ICT is when it's introduced, you expect that there will be a complete disintermediation, but then you create new roles. And that is what is important, that policy helps, because it does roles that needs to be created can be from those people who are basically not redundant, but the roles is no longer applicable, then you can train them to bring them again to the in the production system. Okay.
Great. Thank you so much, Emilio, for fascinating talk, which I hope everyone enjoyed, and thank you to the audience for joining, and some wonderful questions as well.
Beautiful questions.
There are a lot more exciting events coming up this week at the festival, so do check out the programme at lse.ac.uk/festival. The next LSE online skills session will be at the same time tomorrow, 12 till 1, where Dr. Jonathan Cardoso Silva will explore how we should use AI in higher education. I'll also be sharing that one as well tomorrow. You can find out more about our LSE online courses via the link in the chat and on the slide. Thank you for joining, and see you all soon.